I've worked with some beautiful red sorghum that makes some incredibly beautiful tortillas, black sorghum that makes this just incredible, like pitch black, gorgeous, like shockingly colored tortilla. But yes, Chase Obenchain, consultant, jack of all trades, master of none, as many consultants tend to be. But yes, I am a consultant for a pretty broad array of different types of organizations and companies. But one of the main companies that I'm incredibly proud and very grateful and honored to be able to represent is the United Sorghum Checkoff. And so, as such, I am the corporate chef consultant for the checkoff, and really a lot of what my responsibility is in representing them is, being a voice for the farmers and being a champion for sorghum as it can be applied in human food products, whether that be in, national food service, helping, large companies, whether it be quick service restaurants, full service restaurants, dining rooms and non-commercial facilities like you might have in, for instance, like a college campus or a large business cafeteria, helping them understand, why sorghum fits in, where it fits in, how it fits in, applications beyond just, remove your rice and use sorghum instead, but here are the actual reasons why it's great. It's something that you can fit in, and it's not just something that you're fitting in for a nutrient profile, but it's something you're fitting in because it's delicious and it's functional and it makes really fantastic and incredible foods. So yeah, that's a lot of what I do, by and large with my other clients as well as really I always say I help people understand the potential and the opportunity that they have in front of them.
Right. Okay. So, actually, this is a question for later, but you just gave a great lead in for that. So, if you were to give an elevator pitch for the use of sorghum beyond its nutritional value, like you were mentioning, what would that pitch be?
Yeah, well, I think it's different for just about any and all people, right? You can't use the exact same pitch for every single person, right? Somebody has a different need and a different sort of value. So I always say when you're talking to food service professionals, there's no such thing as selling a product. You have to sell a solution, right? In retail and grocery stores, you have to sell a product and hope that people really want it. But in food service, you have to give people a solution to something that they're already facing. So something I talk about a lot is, for instance, in a flour application, so milled sorghum, whole grain sorghum works really beautifully in fried applications. You can use it in, low percentages in things like fried chicken, and it'll make it crispier. It'll also hold longer. So if, for instance, you're catering a large event and you have fried chicken or fried anything and it's got a bit of sorghum flour in it, whether it be 10% or 100%, it's going to hold longer and it's going to stay crunchier for longer than a traditional wheat-based flour. But that said, it's also pretty functional in both a whole and a pearled grain format as well. I really like it in place of things like ditalini pasta or orzo pasta, or even short grain rice. I think it has a really beautiful sort of mouthfeel, eat, and it's significantly easier to cook. And that's one of the other things that I lean into in comparison to other grains, because sorghum is extremely difficult to overcook. I don't know if you've ever cooked rice and you found yourself with really mushy rice and it's all stuck to the pan and you're spending 5, 10 minutes afterwards with a burnt pan and trying to figure out how to get it out. Sorghum is incredibly hard to overcook, and so it allows for, with as much labor shortage as there currently is in the food service world, for people to have something that's easier to menu, something that they don't have to worry about as much, and they're still delivering delicious product with a higher nutrient density overall.
So, like, I've actually read a bit about the processing, especially coming from, say, there's a lot of interesting YouTube videos coming out of Ghana right now, where they're showing their traditional ways of preparing sorghum, And one of the ways which they do it to increase its nutrient density, basically like kind of like folk biochemistry, pretty much, is the sprouting and fermentation process with pitot and things like that. Have you used, say, nixtamalization or fermentation in your sorghum cooking?
Yeah, so I'm still at the very, very front end of my explorations into fermentation. So I can't quite go incredibly in detail there. But that said, to your point, there's something really incredible about kind of the unlocking of the bioavailability of nutrients within sorghum and that different applications of different things. For instance, like you were saying, nixtamalization, the application of an alkali substance what is it, generally calcium hydroxide, if I'm not mistaken, is, something that basically kind of unfurls these incredibly dense structures inside of the grains themselves and allow for it to be even easier to absorb those nutrients. So, yes, to answer your question without rambling so much, I apologize.
Yeah.
I have been doing some work on essentially creating, if you're familiar with the process for creating tortillas. So basically, nixtamalization, you cook down in traditional tortilla making corn with water and a bit of calcium hydroxide. In this case, obviously, you would replace the corn with your sorghum. And what it does is it softens all of those starches within the grain itself. You allow it to soak overnight after boiling it, and then the next day you essentially rinse it, get off as many of the hulls as you can, and then you grind it down into this beautiful paste that you can shape into or form into whatever you'd like. So, it's something that in a very similar way to corn, you can create tortillas, you can create arepas, you can create pupusas, which are, of course, an El Salvadorian dish. So many delicious things, tamales. And it has the exact same sort of texture, mouth feel. And something that I love about it is one, obviously, it's got the nutrient profile of sorghum, which everyone kind of uses as the big thing that they kind of applaud. But something I really love is the fact that sorghum comes in so many different colors. So, I've worked with some beautiful red sorghum that make some incredibly beautiful tortillas, black sorghum that makes this just incredible, like pitch black, gorgeous, like shockingly colored tortilla. So yeah, it's something that's underknown, underutilized. People don't realize what sorghum is something that I keep running into. And the more I talk about it and all of the different applications that it can be shown and the things that can be done with it, people go, "Oh, I never realized that." And so you start to kind of educate the world and open those doors, and people seem to be more interested once they have something that they can relate to at a fundamental level, and they start to pull the string and realize there's a lot of other great things that they can do with it.
Wow, so that's one thing I didn't realize is that you can actually use sorghum and nixtamalize it just like you would corn and replace corn on a one-to-one, like completely replace corn in things like tamales and tortillas and things like that, right?
Yes, that is exactly right. Yeah.
Which is great. I mean, especially coming from here, we're in a sort of like an agricultural, like aggregate, like sort of area where water is a concern. With climate change and everything, that would be a great thing to sort of do out here. Uh,
Yes, a lot of people don't realize is 91% of sorghum fields are exclusively rain fed, right? So, it's one of those things where from a, water conservation perspective, it stands pretty high on that list of things that are very effective for water conservation.
One thing that I found that was really interesting, I believe it's sort of the non-official or maybe perhaps official dish of Ghana is wachi. If you're familiar
Yeah.
with it,
Yes,
you
absolutely, I am.
using the actual leaves as a coloring agent. Is that an application that you've explored yourself?
So yes, that's it's funny that you ask that. A project that I'm currently working on that I've talked about a little bit that it is not currently launched yet is a bit of a celebration of sorghum through its 8,000 years of cultivation. And so it's looking at the celebration of 8,000 years of food cultures around the world, as it either does manifest or could manifest on different plates. So one of those different dishes that I have definitely been testing and working on a bit is wache. And so to your point, it is, of course, well, it's traditionally rice with beans and the sorghum leaf. But of course, as the chef representing the sorghum checkoff, I replace the rice with, of course, whole grain white sorghum. And it's still beautiful. It's such a simple dish. It is essentially the precursor dish that led to the creation of red beans and rice and peas in the Caribbean as well as the deep south of America. So yeah, it's just an incredible dish. It's two super warm, comforting things and a grain and a bean plus a little bit of spices and onions and the introduction of that dark red sorghum leaf gives everything this nice kind of brickish red. It's beautiful. I love it a lot.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, does it impart any sort of flavor? This is something I haven't actually tried.
So if it does, it's very minimal. I mean, in the broader context of the flavor profile of the dish itself, um, it really imparts a lot of color, and from what I understand, also a decent bit of kind of antioxidant quality, from whatever the pigments are in there. I'd have to kind of look at exactly what its composition is, but from a color perspective, it really leads a lot into it, and that's its primary function for the dish as it traditionally has been made. But from a flavor perspective, the leaf doesn't provide a whole ton. Maybe a bit of earthiness, but in a dish that already has black-eyed peas as the primary bean, that's a pretty earthy dish already.
All right, I am not a chef. Okay, this is one of the things that I'm completely lacking in, which is why I'm very excited that you're here to talk with us. I have a bag of sorghum flour and I have a bag of sorghum grain, whole grain. As a home cook, how would you say I approach these two ingredients?
Sure. So, well, I mean, I think starting with the more obvious of the two would be starting with the grain. And so for me, I always tell people to get a feel for how it actually cooks first before you start cooking, really complex dishes. If you've ever had white rice, you kind of have to go through a learning curve of how to cook white rice. And the same thing goes for all other grains, whether it be, farro or quinoa, etc. I know the first time I ever cooked quinoa, I didn't realize that, it cooks really quickly and you can very easily overcook it. Like I was saying earlier with sorghum, it has a bit of an extended cook time. So, if you're working with a whole grain sorghum, depending on the grain size and, where it even potentially came from, it might cook for 45 minutes to an hour. So really getting a feel for that cook time and also the texture that you like. So some people like it slightly more al dente, some people like it slightly, longer cooked to a more tender sort of texture. So that's where I would start first and foremost. Secondarily, I would say, what grain dishes or grain-based things do you naturally cook? For me, I really think that whole grain sorghum holds up beautifully in things like chilies, stews, braises, things like that. It works beautifully in something like a gumbo or a curry. I really love it in something like an oxtail stew. Um, but really, it's something where it fits in pretty beautifully because it is a very neutral grain. It has a really robust texture that holds up and doesn't kind of fall apart like a lot of other grains do in soups and stews and things like that. But, whatever you like, whatever you naturally cook, something that you're kind of comfortable with, cook some sorghum and toss it in there, and it's gonna hold up and it's gonna be beautiful. I mean, we have some fantastic dishes on the website, the Sorghum Checkoff. So please feel free to check those out. I made a beautiful risotto dish that, if you like risotto, sorghum fits in perfectly in place of short grain rice, so that's a good place to start there as well. But from a flour perspective, so like I was saying at the top of this, I grew up in the South. I'm from North Carolina originally, so I really love it as a sort of supplemental or even as a you know pure replacement in a lot of fried applications. So For building out your fried chicken or fried okra, it's really incredible for that, and just creating an extra crunch or holding it for a big sort of dinner that you might be holding and not having to worry about it getting soggy. But it also works really beautifully if you've ever done any tempura application, if you've ever used like a really light batter. Sorghum has this really awesome just laciness that kind of comes with when you mix it with, tempura batters. Pretty simple. It's usually, your flour plus some seltzer, salt, etc. And it creates this really nice, light, super thin, incredibly crispy, crunchy um, breading that when you bite into it, it just has this beautiful crunch. It shatters apart, but it's not heavy. It's not like oily or anything like that. So I love it in a lot of fried applications, but it's also beautiful in baked goods too. So yeah, I could go on and on and on. If you go on the website, we have a lot of really incredible recipes, working on plenty of other incredible recipes. One other one that I'll allude to just really quickly as a sneak peek into the kind of world map that we're working on and trying to build out is if you've ever had French pastries, madeleines are a pretty iconic one. They're these little like sort of seashell shaped pastries. I created a formulation for a Madeleine recipe recently that's just beautiful. It's spongy and soft and delicious and everything that you want in a Madeleine. It just happens to be, gluten-free and sorghum based. And while that's good, I think it's really awesome that it's the sorghum is the thing that's doing it. I always say it's delicious first and it's gluten-free second. So, I don't want people to feel like they have to eat gluten-free if they eat sorghum. They can just love delicious things and being gluten-free is a plus.
Oh, that's great. And then coming from the South, there's a long tradition. This is one of the overlooked things about sorghum as a crop is it's actually like sort of a, no, I wouldn't say a dryland sugar cane, but like a source of syrup. How do you like to use the syrup?
Oh man, the syrup is such a beautifully flexible ingredient. So to your point, it's got a very similar, borderline identical processing to sugarcane, right? It's these, essentially sugar sorghum stalks that are pressed for their juice, and this juice is, this highly, sugary based sap of sorts that then goes into boiling and similar to molasses or maple syrup, you boil it down for a long time until it creates this really beautiful sticky sweet golden brown syrup. And the way that I describe the syrup is it's fairly similar to molasses, but it's pardon me. It's a lot lighter. It's a lot more mild. It's grassier. It has a more kind of rounded sweetness. And it doesn't have that bitterness that molasses gives you. So I really love it for, you know, in conjunction with things like brown sugar for sweetening different drinks. Things like sweet tea take really nicely to a bit of sorghum syrup. It works really fantastically just in place of other sugars or for sweetening different things, for building out a salsa or a chutney. It's really beautiful in there. For whatever reason, a lot of the dishes that I've used it in very recently are escaping my mind. But it's really fantastic as a base for something like a barbecue sauce as well. So, anywhere that you might naturally use molasses, anywhere that you might naturally use brown sugar or maple syrup, glazing things like carrots or sweet potatoes, it's beautiful for that sort of application. So, on vegetables as just a mild sweetener. It's fantastic. It's delicious. It's super functional and it's got this really nice unique flavor that's not overwhelming in the way that something like molasses is, or it's not overly sweet in the way that brown sugar can be. So yeah, it has just a beautiful functionality and flexibility wherever you want to fit in sweetness with a kind of unique flavor as well.
But I wanted you maybe elaborate on this a little bit. Sorghum has a rich cultural and historical significance worldwide. There's a lot of wild stories and myths actually attached to this that have come from Africa and are in the Caribbean region. One of which is actually, I don't know if you've read about this, the Sukoyant, which is a sort of a variety of the vampire legend that involves sorghum.
I do
Um,
not know this one.
Oh, it's amazing. I have a whole interview about that legend with Dr. Anatol. I'll send you a link. But
Oh, cool.
how is the heritage being how can it be preserved? How can its cultural heritage be preserved, say in the kitchen or say through your work?
Yeah, no, I love that as a question. Honestly, I think that there is both a really incredible thing happening in the world of food while also being a somewhat dangerous thing that's happening in the world of food where, with this hyper globalization that we're going through and a access to more and more global ingredients and cuisines, um, trying to preserve and maintain the either context or just I suppose really the traditional application and use and respect for both recipes and ingredients is needed, right? I think that a big part of what I'm doing, for instance, with this World Showcase of Sorghum is to say sorghum was first cultivated about 8,000 years ago. We want to give a bit of a look and a context as to where it started, kind of in that northern, northeastern region of Africa near Sudan and Egypt, etc., to say here are some traditional applications of how it's been used and giving the most traditional versions of those recipes as we can, create for people to use in their own homes and expect them to be able to make in their own homes here in America, while also giving people a look into saying, some of these things you might not be able to find, for instance, sorghum leaves at your house. We want to give you something that maybe either challenges you or we know that if you're really interested in it, you'll go out and you'll find it. Or, for those people who are used to those dishes that, feel like there's a lack of representation of what they're used to cooking out there, providing a larger sort of championing or an audience to be able to see those dishes that they may be used to. There's a lot of really incredible people from all over the world here in America, right? And being able to be a voice for those lesser known cuisines, those lesser known dishes, and being able to provide a broader context as to, these are incredible things that everyone should be enjoying. So that's a really long roundabout answer to say that as a chef, we have a really high degree of responsibility to tell the stories as they are and respect the ingredients and respect the cultures, respect the dishes as they are, but also give our perspective as to, how they can fit within our own personal cooking, our translation for our audience, and provide the best sort of culmination of those two worlds to create a great story, but also allow the people at the end of the line to be able to take that story and adopt it in their own kitchens and use them as they would.
Okay, then I'd like to maybe round this out with maybe can you explain your consulting business and where do you see where you want your consulting business? Can you tell us more about that before we have to let you go?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my consulting, like I said, kind of at the top, a lot of what I do is help people understand the potential and the value that they have already inherent in front of them. So a lot of my work is doing everything from supporting and advising early stage startups to small mom and pop food service or manufacturing companies, all the way up to very large global corporations and representing, everything from product development and helping them understand where they should go with their positioning of their product, who their ideal audience is, how they can better appeal to that audience, or taking whatever their ingredients are and saying, this is how we can better leverage what you're doing or restructure what you're doing to create better solutions for the changing market that we have out there in food service. There are a lot of people who don't have access to food that deserve to have more access to more delicious goods, more delicious products. And I grew up in a very similar state where I didn't have a lot of access to food. I always say I learned how to cook out of survival. My parents worked really long hours, didn't have a lot of money, so I learned to cook because I needed to. And I want to be a voice for those people who um, want to have good food and deserve to have good food. So, I really broadly speaking, do everything I can to help, the people who grow the food, the people who make the food. And I just want to be a beacon of innovation and goodness in the world and use food as my lens for doing so. So, really it's all about giving people access, giving people something delicious and something that they can feel good about putting in front of themselves or in front of their family at the end of the day. So that is what I do, and I do it for every single size of company. And so long as there's good people to feed, I'll continue to do that.
Well, that's great to hear. Your website?
ChaseObenchain.com, first and last name. So there you go.
Excellent. Chase Obenchain, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's been a pleasure.
All right, take care.